Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Soapbox. We're the Babbling Idiots, and with us here today is Michael Marrow.
What's up?
What's up? So, today we're going to talk about some of the recent developments in the campaign first. As most of you all know, because there's been outrage everywhere, Ted Cruz and Kasich have both dropped out, leaving Donald Trump as the only Republican runner in the presidential election. Anybody have anything to say about that?
Well, on Tuesday, when they dropped out, it was actually my birthday, and I was eating out with my dad. And I was telling my dad how, because there's this whole debate between, Trump has the popular vote, but the Republican Party can do something to make sure he doesn't get the nomination. I was telling my dad, as much as I hate Trump, if he didn't get the nomination, I would see that as anti-democratic. I think there's this huge thing on the left where we're for democracy, but only for ourselves. So even if Trump has the popular vote among Republicans, even though maybe not among Republicans because so many Republicans hate him, but even if he has the popular vote because we find his ideas so horrible and we think he'd be such a terrible president, we won't give him the nomination. That's anti-democratic, and I don't agree with that. But then he's now the only option, so that doesn't really matter anymore.
I mean, two things. One, Trump didn't need to get 1237 for delegates. He needed to get close. And then the rest of the delegates, especially Cruz delegates who were elected from districts where Trump won, which happened a lot in Pennsylvania, would just vote for Trump out of guilt. So Trump didn't need to get 1237. He just needed to get close. And the second thing is that the rules are if somebody doesn't get a majority of delegates, then those delegates that were elected, the party doesn't pick them. People elect them in their respective districts, go to the convention, and then at the convention, they have the right to pick the delegate they have the right to pick the nominee if they don't get the majority. So this system prevents us from having a whole nother primary, like a national runoff primary, when our system consists of 50 states that all have different voting procedures and would never go for a national primary again because then New Hampshire loses its prominence in Iowa and South Carolina and the rest. So everybody wants to keep it the way it is. So it's just not plausible at all to say that we could have some other system, that there's a better system than the convention system that exists. And Trump supporters were complaining for so long that he'd get screwed out at a convention, which to me is just laughable because if he's so popular and he's such a unifier, then he should be able to bring delegates to his side at a contested convention. So
that's true. He promotes himself as unifier, and he's always talking about how popular he is. Well, he's clearly not very popular.
My favorite thing is the update that he recently posted on the Cinco de Mayo about how he's like, oh, I love Mexican food. Trump Tower has the best Mexican food.
Yeah, I shared that, and I got like a bunch of likes. Like, it was one of those things I didn't expect people to be like, oh my God, that's so cool. But it's like he says how he's like eating Mexican food, and then at the end, I love Hispanics. Why?
Yeah. Well, then there's the I love Hispanics thing, which is like he hasn't been the nominee for 24 hours and he's still like shamelessly pandering. And the second thing was that the taco bowl that he was eating was on top of a picture of his ex-wife.
Yeah, I saw someone point that out.
Like, this guy's still keeping tabs on her. So,
he's still
my God.
And he might be the president, especially if Bernie claims he's going to run as an independent, which I think would just be the worst possible thing that could happen to the Democratic Party at this point. Because so many people hate Trump that if Hillary just won, like if she just ran by herself, she would win. But if Bernie takes away votes from Hillary in the general election, then we'll really see what's going to happen to the position of the president.
I know you want me to talk about like where I am on the Bernie or bust thing right now, because I've been going hard on all the hashtags on Twitter, like the hashtag dropout Hillary, hashtag which Hillary. And for a while I was saying if it's Hillary versus Trump, I'll vote for Hillary because I just don't want Trump. But now I'm thinking, well, if I'm voting for Hillary, that's in a way saying I support whatever the Democratic Party is doing and I don't agree with what they're doing. So I'm leaning more towards just not voting right now. And Hillary supporters are saying not voting is a vote for Trump. Well, maybe Hillary being crazy is a vote for Trump. Like, if Hillary wasn't so crazy and wasn't flip-flopping all the time and didn't have all these problems, then I would probably be more willing to vote for her. So, by proxy of her just being insane to so many people, that's what's causing people to not want to vote for her. Not, you can't just blame me for now. If Trump becomes president, anything he does, like, Bernie supporters are instantly going to be blamed for it.
Also, like, liberals, whatever happened to democracy, like, every vote is mine and every vote matters.
That's what we're talking about.
Why are you trying
here.
to disenfranchise people by taking away their right to choose?
Yeah.
So these are people that complain that Republicans are, bullying people and, using legal tactics to disenfranchise people, which has a measure of truth of it if you really want to be honest about some of these new voter ID laws. But for the most part, Democrats are trying to suppress people's right to vote for whoever they want to, which is supposed to be a freedom in a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And that's kind of my idea whenever I'm talking about the regressive left. Like, I'm on the left, but I complain about the left more than the right. I have plenty to say about the right, but what bothers me about the left is just the self-righteousness. We think we're doing the right thing. We think we're for freedom and democracy when we're doing all these things that are anti-democratic. Like, back when the Chicago Trump rally was shut down and when protesters were blocking the roads to Trump rallies, I was saying, well, as much as I hate Trump as much as you do.
That's why Trump voters exist.
Yeah,
because people like this exist.
It's like when people talk about when they criticize Black Lives Matter, it's because they're doing these things that they have legitimate concerns and they're real concerns, but they're doing it in a way that's getting people to hate them, like blocking roads and just yelling at people.
Like, do you remember when a Black Lives Matter supporter got up in front of Bernie?
Yeah.
Even though he marched with the civil rights movement and was arrested for civil rights activism, it's like, what are you trying to accomplish?
And even the most liberal people saw that and were like, you don't know what you're doing.
We've talked about how alienation leads to resentment in terms of terrorism before, but it's a really good point that Trump supporters come from Bernie supporters and other extremely left liberals just trying to get rid of Trump as a whole, by trying to stop Trump from saying anything or being able to say anything. They're causing people to be like, well, then maybe Trump has something important to say if they're trying to stop him from saying it.
Yeah, whenever there's some movement that's going to have this, whenever there's a huge movement on either side that is radical to that side, you bet there's going to be a equally radical movement against that on the other side. I mean, if you want to bring physics into it, it's which law is that? Newton's law, the third? Every action has an equal and opposite. Yeah, so if a bunch of liberals create this insane regressive movement, then there's going to be people on the right that are going to rise to the and challenge that.
Yeah, I mean, liberals are getting very totalitarian on college campuses with this safe space crap and absolutely repressing free speech. I was at a conference.
Trigger warnings.
Yeah, I was at a conference over December, and there was an organization that came and presented at the conference, and basically they exist to sue universities in order to protect the First Amendment, because universities keep stripping students of First Amendment rights. Like, this is why people were getting pissed off that that facts are bending to feelings and that people's opinions are so harmful that they should be suppressed. Like, it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. There's so many voices in this anti-regressive left movement that I love, but are you familiar with Milo Yiannopoulos?
Yeah.
I love that guy now. Like, even if there's I've talked about this before, like, whenever there's someone that is on the right that has some ideas that I might have disagreements with, but they are really hardline about what the left is doing is not a good thing, I love that person. And Milo's the most entertaining person. He's so base. Like, he doesn't care what people think, but not in the sense of Trump. It's like, the thing is, Milo's actually right about this stuff. And just seeing him go on college campuses and triggering people, and Patrick, I don't know if you saw it, but like, if I recommend you watch the UMass thing that he did with
Steven Crowder.
Steven Crowder and Christina Hoff Sommers. It was amazing. Just the entire time, people were just, it was beautiful but frustrating at the same time.
So, Michael, with the limited options that we have in this upcoming election, who are you leaning towards support of?
None of the above. I'm not.
What options?
Yeah, because the thing is, well, Hillary's going to win Virginia regardless. Like, there's just about nothing I can do for that. And if you ask me to vote for Trump, that's getting me to do a lot. And if you ask me to go and publicly support and whip votes for Trump, that is just something that I'm not going to do. So you're already lucky enough if you're getting me to vote for Trump. But the fact of the matter is that too many people, too many Republicans are either going to stay home or they're not, or they're going to vote third party. They've done polls in exit polls in certain states, and like anywhere from a quarter to a third of Republicans aren't going to support Trump if he's the nominee. So that goes against Trump, and then some of them will flip and vote for Hillary. So that's like 2 votes against Trump. So I do not know who I'm supporting because A, my vote probably won't matter in Virginia. I'm still going to vote in the congressional race, though. But B, if a viable third-party candidate emerges, like Jim Webb or Michael Bloomberg, I wish he would run third party. Or I wish Ben Sass would run. He's not going to do it, though. Unless somebody else who's better emerges, I'm not going to vote.
There's a group of people on the left now, like mostly Bernie supporters, that are backing Jill Stein. She's like a Green Party nominee, and she sides with Bernie on a lot of things. So I think people, I don't even know what's going on with that, because it's like if Bernie can't win, then how is this third party that only a fraction of Bernie supporters know about is going to have any effect?
But honestly, this would be the election for an independent,
viable third party.
Yeah,
I agree.
Because I mean, Donald Trump's essentially independent, although he's like running as a Republican. Bernie would probably have to run as a Democrat if he made it, but he's essentially independent. And there's all these other people that could be independent candidates. So it's funny, like I feel like whenever someone says this is one of the most important points in history, I feel like people have a reason to believe that's not true because people are always saying that. But this truly is a election that can change things.
Maybe I'd vote Libertarian. My goal with this is to legitimize a third party to a point that makes the other 2 parties actually start competing.
Mm-hmm. I know for a long time there's a lot of people out there, and I've been a person included in this for so long, that complains about the 2-party system because there are a lot of flaws in it. But I forgot who it was I was listening to the other day that was saying the reason we don't want to have a ton of parties is because then somebody could get into office with such a small minority vote. If you have 10 different parties and there's a candidate for all those parties, then that person's going to get into office with like a single-digit percentage of people.
No, then the House is going to pick the president. That nobody's going to get a majority in the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
The only solution that would be like an alternative vote or something like that, where, just an infinite amount of runoffs.
Mm-hmm. But I know you're a critic of Bernie Sanders on a lot of his economic issues. I'm skeptical of a lot of his economic policies, but I don't know enough about them to really know what I think about them. But I know you can explain them really well. So please begin. I know you don't know where to start.
So that's like exactly the thing. It's like where to start.
Mm-hmm.
So
free college. That's like the big thing. That's the biggest one, I think, for people.
Like the thing it's a really fast out argument to make, but the thing with free college is who pays for free college.
Yeah, it's free, but who pays for it?
And the fact of the matter is Bernie makes an unfair comparison between the United States and Europe, because Europe is a homogenous society that can amply supply most of their social welfare programs. And the fact of the matter is that not nearly as many European students go to college because they take up like vocational training and apprenticeships and stuff and go directly into the workforce.
Yeah,
even
just to get into college, like they have to pass really hard exams and stuff, and people are categorized in those societies, like, oh, this group passed enough of their exams to go to college, this group has to go to vocational school, this group apprenticeships and stuff. So
Exactly. And that's a product of the government rationing resources. The fact of the matter is, in the United States, you can go to any college you want to if you can borrow the money. But my problem with the free college plan is not only is it's not feasible because it can't be paid for, but it also doesn't address the fact why college is so expensive in the first place. And it's that the federal government backs student loans so that colleges don't have an incentive to hold down costs of going to college because they know students will just take the loans regardless of how much college costs. So colleges are raising tuitions through the roof because they don't have to compete with each other. And a lot of the improvements that they're doing in their universities are cosmetic because it attracts athletes, it attracts more money.
The gyms.
They try to beautify the campus instead of actually improving the educational material as well. And one of the reasons why I really liked Marco Rubio's college plan was he pointed out that there are basically only 3 accreditation institutions in the United States. So higher education has been monopolized. So there's no competition in it. So if you really wanted to improve the cost of college in the United States, you'd have to force colleges to compete with one another again. The only way you do that is to end federally backed loans. And especially for the time being, you can't have equal, or the interest rates of the student loans need to reflect the major. If you're an art major, there is no economic reason why your interest rate should be the same as an engineering major, because there aren't jobs for art. And when the money that you're borrowing is from me, the taxpayer, I want some reflection of the risk that I'm taking by funding your education. So that's how real loans work. I don't see why this doesn't apply in college. And Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders calling for lower interest rates and flat interest rates on student loans is absolutely nuts, because there's no market forces to reflect how valuable that education is. At some point, and this is just while loans are federally backed. If loans are federally backed, I don't care what the interest rates are. But for the time being, as long as the federal government is going to be funding and backing higher education student loans, there should be a more efficient way to ration the resources that the federal government's putting out, because it's not happening right now.
You mentioned that the interest rate should vary based on major. So are you saying like people with like art majors and stuff should have to pay higher interest rates?
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as it's on, I mean, that doesn't sound fair, but why is it fair that you have a much higher chance of not paying back that loan than somebody who has a more secure job market? It's an economic, once you go out into the real world and you want to get a house loan or a car loan, and there's no way you're going to be able to pay it, the bank's going to charge you a higher interest rate. Or if there's a higher risk that you won't be able to pay it, the bank's going to charge you a higher interest rate. So why suspend the rules of economics when you're using everybody else's money?
But liberals don't want economic truth. They want what feels good, right? That's what we were saying with like when we were talking about feminism. It's like all economists agree that these statistics they're throwing around are bunk, but that doesn't agree with our narrative. We're not going to pay attention to the economics. We want our narrative.
Yeah, it's part of that violent trend that I tried to talk about last time a little bit, about like moral relativism, where people don't really care about what's actually like right or wrong or like the proper thing to do. They just want to do what's like best for them and what makes them feel good. So
and I think it's important, the point you brought up about free college, where I forgot what I was about to say. It was addressing the root issue of why college is expensive.
Yeah.
That's why people have problems with things like raising the minimum wage as well, and welfare programs. Here's where I am with welfare programs, and I might not know enough to have what I say be. I'm not confident with what I'm saying, but with things like food stamps and welfare, you should have to. Able-bodied people should work in order to receive those things. We can't just hand them out. To bring economics into it, you have to be producing something for society and able to get some help for your family. So that with welfare programs, I can equate it to what you're saying about free college. Is we need to address the root cause of why people are poor and why they can't feed their kids, instead of just taking taxpayer money and turning it into these programs and these policies that just make it easier for people.
The thing about feeding kids is like a total myth, essentially, because America does not have a scarcity of food. If anything, there's an overabundance of food. The only issue really is the distribution of like healthy food, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, like, people who get these food stamps from the government don't usually use them. They usually try to sell them for money to do other things with them, which just doesn't make any sense.
I remember us
to me.
talking about that a while ago. Another thing is the amount of waste of food is huge. I remember seeing something like you could fill this many New Orleans Superdomes with the amount of wasted food. And they were also showing this thing in grocery stores where what grocery stores do with food is they always make sure the shelf is stocked, because if everyone buys all the heads of lettuce and there's one left, everyone's going to assume there's something wrong with that head of lettuce. So they overstock the shelves just to make it look like everything, like it's fresh lettuce. So then all that stuff that people don't buy gets thrown away within like 2 days.
I think you raise an interesting point about the distribution of healthy food in the United States, because it's clear that one of the biggest problems among poverty in the United States is obesity. And I think it's interesting that at least in America, poor people don't starve. That was not the case for much of human history. Poor people starved all throughout human history. And I just find it funny when people attack McDonald's and Burger King and all the fast food chains, and they're like, oh, you know, they're making everybody unhealthy. Well, it's first of all, McDonald's doesn't put a gun to people's head and make them walk in the front door. And second of all, would you rather have poor people starve rather than be fed? So even if the food's not healthy?
Yeah, there's truth to that.
That's what shows that it's a distribution problem, because if there were people really going hungry because they were poor, then we wouldn't have the obesity epidemic, essentially.
Mm-hmm. But of course, there's still a lot of people that aren't poor that are completely overweight.
Yeah.
So
that's a whole other thing, though. That's not. That's like habits and.
Yeah. There's overlap between these two problems. But I know we were talking about this in our first episode, and you brought up, I really liked the term you used. You said healthy food deserts, where there's places where there isn't like good supermarkets with healthy foods. It's just all run-down supermarkets that don't have fresh food and healthy food.
A lot of Walmarts.
Yeah, Walmarts everywhere. I mean, the Walmarts here we have are pretty good.
But that's because they know their markets, essentially, and they know that in this affluent area, people will be able to afford like fresh produce and meat and stuff. Meanwhile, in a poorer area, they're not going to take the risk of just bringing out healthy food out there when people aren't going to be able to afford it.
Mm-hmm. And with fast food, another thing to understand, I'm just kind of now playing with this idea of what's right versus what promotes economic freedom. All the fast food places have a right to appeal towards their customers. They have a right to, as horrible as it sounds, they have a right to advertise to children. They're doing what's going to maximize their profit, but you do have to find the boundary. I know we were talking about in the first episode also soda taxes, which there's so much argument that can be made. I don't know where I specifically am on it, but I lean towards being in support of a soda tax because it would cut down on so much healthcare costs if you can directly equate people drinking more soda with huge healthcare costs.
I mean, I think there's an established trend between soda and obesity and overweight.
I don't want it to sound like I don't think there's a correlation. There definitely is.
But I just think it's interesting that liberals want to socialize medicine and then take away everybody's right to treat their bodies like crap. I have the right to put whatever I want to into my body. Mm-hmm. And I understand that's, a soda tax is not, really, it's not preventing me from doing that, like, legally, but for the most part, it's infringing on my right to do it more regularly. And I'm in favor of the government taxing behaviors which aren't, which are harmful. I would say like tobacco.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I mean, even with tobacco taxes, what was that guy's name in New York? Gardner. He was selling bootlegged cigarettes because the cigarette taxes were so high.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think there's really going to be a viable market for soda. Maybe
Yeah,
black market
yeah.
for soda.
Because people sell loose cigarettes to bypass the cigarette tax, the sin tax as it's called. But yeah, I think it's an interesting idea that you can argue that a soda tax and all these taxes are against what you're saying about I have a right to put whatever in my body. It's like discouraging me from putting what I want to put into my body. But at the same time, those things do lead to increases in healthcare costs that affect other people. There's huge externalities related to these products that are unhealthy for people. So the government should have the right to tax those, but you can argue to what extent, because you can have the idea that reduces people's ability to do what they want.
Yeah.
I mean, but when you give the government the right to tax, like that sort of thing, it just you're essentially saying that, hey, you can control what we're allowed to consume.
Yeah.
And they tried to do that with prohibition. It's the same thing, but in a more radical sense, and that didn't exactly go over well with society. So it's just, that's the problem with the tax, is that sure, you're saying like, oh, this isn't healthy, but you're not giving people the right to choose. And just where does it end at that point,
I saw not too long ago that Hillary was saying something about how she supported a soda tax, and certain people said it was elitist and against poor people. But then there was a glimmer of hope, because a lot of people on the left said, well, no, it's a good thing for people. You're not being forced to drink soda. I know Alex has told us about how in certain places in the world it's cheaper to buy Coke than it is to get clean water, which is insane. But as far as I know, that's not the case here. So poor people are not forced to drink soda.
Unless you're in Flint, Michigan.
Well, maybe that's different. But you know what I'm saying, because even the most liberal people, for the most part, agree that poor people aren't being forced to drink soda. And raising a soda tax, although it would affect poor people the most, that's the idea, because
they're the ones most at risk.
They're the ones most at risk for having poor health effects due to drinking too much soda.
I don't know. I just get a little uncomfortable whenever the government decides how to make my health decisions for me.
Of course, yeah.
But I think the thing that the difference between alcohol and tobacco is, like, alcohol is trying to regulate a social behavior, and tobacco and soda and stuff are really more of an economic one because of, shared healthcare costs, which is a byproduct of socialized, or to an extent socialized medicine, where people have to pay for other people's healthcare. So is this the part where we get to talk about why Bernie's healthcare plan is absolutely nuts?
Sure, go ahead.
So my whole issue, so it started with Obamacare, and I just find it funny that people who support government mediation in the marketplace have been like, oh, the marketplace for healthcare has been failing, when there hasn't been a healthcare market for decades in this country, because states have special monopolies set up for healthcare companies that don't compete with each other across state lines. If you want to see that healthcare costs that are exposed to competition are cheaper and are actually competitive, and that's working, look at the cost of LASIK eye surgeries over the past decade. The costs have plummeted because there's no monopoly for LASIK eye care. And with the current healthcare system, there's no viable marketplace. That's just ground zero for what's wrong with the American healthcare system. If there were a free market system where healthcare companies could compete, then healthcare costs wouldn't be getting so expensive. But with Obamacare doesn't fix any of the problems with the healthcare system, because A, it doesn't fix the problems with the state monopolies. B, the part of Obamacare that was basically crucial to it operating, which is the Medicaid expansion that Virginia didn't accept, but most states have. Or B, part one, when states accept the federal money, the Democrats have been like, oh, it's free money from the federal government. Well, the states have to eventually, the federal government rolls back the payments on the Medicaid expansion, so the states have to pay for it eventually. And that would be the largest, if Virginia were to accept the Medicaid expansion, it would be the largest expansion of Virginia's budget in history. Virginia would have to raise taxes. So that's why they didn't accept the Medicaid expansion. And the second part is that Medicaid is not good health coverage. There's this line that, it's better to have bad healthcare coverage than no healthcare coverage. Well, no good doctor accepts Medicaid. You notice it at most private primary care doctors. They have signs posted everywhere that say we don't accept Medicaid because Medicaid has terrible reimbursement rates for medical services. So accepting Medicaid is basically just pushing a bunch of federal money that at one point is going to become an unfunded mandate. And the last part of Obamacare that's a failure is that healthcare costs are still going up. What was the company that just got out? The healthcare company that ceased operating with Obamacare. I can't remember the name of it right now.
Sure.
But they stopped operating because they weren't turning a profit. And and the reason why they got out was beforehand, most of these healthcare companies knew it wouldn't work. And that's why Obamacare is written of, by, and for special interest lobbyists. And Senate Republicans stripped a measure of Obamacare that would subsidize healthcare companies that aren't turning a profit. And since that's gone now, a lot of these healthcare companies are getting out because they can't afford to operate in the Obamacare system. So clearly, medical costs are still going up in spite of, Obama saying Obamacare is great. And
he makes so many videos about it too. He's like, Obamacare is great. Sign up.
The reason why he makes videos about it, and maybe this is a little cynical, but the only way Obamacare can work, the only way socialized medicine can really work in general is to put the burden on young people, because young people are productive and they don't need medical coverage as much as old people. So when you get into a system where medicine is socialized, it needs to be rationed. Another part of Obamacare that's failure is that we actually have a doctor deficit in this country. So even if you give everybody health care, there will still be lines to see doctors. And that's why in England and throughout Europe, you can't see a doctor immediately. You have to wait because the medicine has to be rationed. And that will be especially the case in the United States where, in England, at least you have socialized education to go through socialized medicine. But in the United States, doctors have to go through 8 to 10 years of colleges, massive student loans to enter a healthcare system like this that has crap reimbursement rates. They can't really pay back the money that they spent to get their education. So it'll be a complete failure. And Bernie's plan would just be an expansion of that by his plan, Medicare for all. The Medicare taxes would have to go way up. There's just no way that if Bernie thinks that, unless Bernie wants to just borrow the money, if he really wants to be honest, you cannot pay for Medicare for all without a huge increase in Medicare taxes. And the fact that it doesn't fix the problem why healthcare costs are going up. It's not good medicine. So that's why everybody comes to the United States for good healthcare. I understand that it's expensive, but for the most part, the United States is still the world's leading source for healthcare because we may not have the healthcare that is most affordable for its citizens and treats all of its citizens, but we have the gold standard for the care that we actually produce.
Some examples of this is in a lot of South American countries with socialized medical care, essentially, basically what they force their patients to do is like, hey, you can come in, you can get free medical care, but you have to pay for your bandages and you have to pay for your bed and you have to bring your own pillows and stuff. I know this because my mom is from Venezuela, which is essentially a failed socialist state. So if I even mention socialism around her, she just like goes on about how terrible a system of it is. And that's what they have to do down there. And essentially, like, it's not even just for medicine, it's for everything. Like, my mom sends care packages home, basically, where she like sends them things that they just can't find. And her niece is a doctor, and she just talks about how there's no doctors and there's not good enough care. And I mean, an example is this one girl came in and she had been to like 4 doctors, and like the care was so bad, like she was having terrible stomach pains, and they found out that there were 5 bags of cocaine in her stomach system. And she went through 4 doctors before they figured this out, which isn't like a complicated thing. So it just shows you how much socialized Medicare can mess things up.
And Michael, I'm glad you brought up the point of countries with these healthcare systems that Americans seem to love, where it takes so long for them to get healthcare. I think, if I remember correctly, Canada's the same way, where liberals look at Canada and they say, look, they have free healthcare, that's so great. But the quality isn't as great as America's because people have to wait so long to get things done, if I remember correctly. And also, if you make access to healthcare so easy that anyone can just go and get their healthcare and it doesn't cost them anything, then so much more people are going to use healthcare, and people are going to use it for the smallest things. It annoys me when people have a cold and they go to the doctor. I have all these things that always happen to me, like I might have some bump on my skin or whatever, and my mom's like, you should go get that checked out. And I'm like, no, because I don't need to see the doctor. I'm only going to go to the doctor if I really need to go to the doctor.
Yeah, and Obamacare does not address tort reform. Howard Dean, I think it was back in like 2010, they asked him about tort reform, and he was like, well, the Trial Lawyers Association didn't want tort reform in Obamacare, so it wasn't put in there. So doctors have to protect themselves from all these asinine lawsuits that can be leveraged against them, and that's why they have to pay. One of the reasons why medical service costs so much money is because they have to go through all these procedures to make sure they don't miss anything, to make sure there are no mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. In European countries, they don't have to protect against this because you can't sue the government when the government owns the medicine. So that's one of the reasons why it costs so much more. And another reason is that, litigation aside, there's just a lot of risk that they have to pay malpractice insurance, which keeps going up and up and up because lawsuits keep getting bigger. So states now are moving to capping lawsuits, the max amount of money you can get for medical malpractice lawsuit. But some states are raising them too, and some states don't really have them.
And related to, I want to hear your thoughts on the term democratic socialism that Bernie keeps throwing around. For a while, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and said, oh, okay, he says it's democratic. But last week, Steven Crowder was on Dave Rubin's show, and he single-handedly made me just say, like, yeah, that democratic socialism is a horrible thing for him to say. Because he was saying, you can throw the word democratic in front of any word, and it'll sound a little bit better. You can say democratic genocide, and it makes it sound a little bit better, but it's the same thing. Democratic genocide would be, let's all decide which group of people we kill. Well, democratic socialism is still socialism. You just put the word democratic in front of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sprinkling sugar on crap and calling it candy. So, what does that even mean? Democratic socialism? I mean, it's such a, this is the reason why Trump and Bernie are the same person, because it's such a vague, annoying, meaningless, and substanceless platitude that really is just meant to emotionally affect people. Like, oh, I have a voice in this government. Well, actually, no, because in socialism, you don't have a voice, because your economic freedoms are just as important as any other freedoms, and the government can't control an economy without controlling people. So if you really think you have a choice in quote unquote democratic socialism, you're fooling yourself because you don't have a say in your money, which is what, what was it, Voltaire, that when it comes to money, all men are of the same religion. So people find out very quickly. And that's why, like, your mom, it's so interesting, these advocates of socialism, that capitalism exploits people. Like, do people leave socialist countries and come to capitalist ones to be exploited, or are they voting with their feet? Like when Hong Kong was still a part of, it was still autonomous from China. Hundreds of thousands of people every day would cross the border from China to Hong Kong. And it's like, are people going there to be exploited, or are they going there for opportunity? So, and why would we want to be socialist? Bernie talks up European economies, that they have stronger economies, blah, blah, blah. Well, the average American is still better off than the average European. That's just economic and factually speaking. And the second thing is that, they did a study of all the European countries, or at least the ones in the EU, the richer countries. And if any single one of the richer EU countries joined the United States, they'd be the 49th or the 48th poorest state. So, and these are countries with millions of people, and, they're supposed to be developed economies and world economic powers. Even Germany. I was pretty surprised to find Germany pretty low. It was like the 80s or, the 70s when California was a larger economy than Germany, was one of the largest economies in the world, when Republicans ran the state and not Democrats. But I just ask, why would we want to be a socialist? Like, I understand there are problems in America, but socialism is not the answer and never has been throughout the course of human history.
It seems that the problem is that people are always talking about all these other freedoms, like freedom of speech and expression and having a political, being able to cast your vote and all that. But the one we often forget when people start advocating for socialism is they forget economic freedom. And that's probably because they just see some of these bad things that come out of, like, extreme exploitation, like we were just talking about, fast food companies that target children so with predatory ad campaigns, whatever you want to say. They just see these horrible things that come out of capitalism run to the extreme, and people being exploited through it, but they don't understand that capitalism is a lot better than these other economic systems.
It just seems really childish to me. Like, you know that there's always those kids that when they don't have their way, they just want to quit whatever they're doing. Like, I lost a soccer game, I don't want to play soccer anymore. And that's kind of what it sounds like to me when people are just like, let's just switch America to socialism. Or some of the stupider people who are like, why aren't we communism? Just because it didn't work in Russia doesn't mean it won't work here. Like, there are people that I know who say that, and it just sounds like you're just giving up way too easily. Like, sure, there are problems, but they're all fixable through the proper legislation.
And you were saying, why do these people come here? Yeah, you have to realize there was over, I don't know what specific time periods, but there's always been so much immigration or attempt of from these communist and socialist societies. And a lot of the reasons they can't get here sometimes is because those communist and socialist countries are totalitarian. And I know we talk frequently about the horseshoe, where the far right is fascist and the far left is equally fascist. Just because you're far to the left and people think the left is all about freedom and being nice to people, these far left totalitarian societies are just as brutal towards people that want to leave than other societies.
I mean, being far right and being far left, like, there's really not much difference in policy. It's just that being far left, you sort of masquerade as wanting to do the good of the will of the people, whatever that means. Pursuing your own personal ambitions. Far right people are at least honest about it. Like, Trump knows that, that he's a fascist and that this election's about himself, and he gloats about himself all the time. Like, at least he's honest about his ego. So I just laugh when these far leftists who are total communists and, totalitarians, masquerade as social warriors and, the protector of the common man. That's such crap.
Yeah, and that's why these totalitarian communist societies were so horrible, because Stalin masqueraded, I like your use of that term, as someone that was for the people and it's the workers' party and we're going to take care of the workers. But he was a brutal dictator, and he stole from people and killed everybody, and it was horrible. And often people don't realize that he killed way more people than any other dictator in history. Mao is probably above him. I'm not exactly sure on it. Well, Mao was a communist too. Thanks for reminding me of that. But yeah, people don't seem to realize that Hitler always seems to be the top guy because he targeted a certain group of people and he was the cause for this world war. But people seem to forget that because Russia was our ally for some point, they just don't see Stalin in the same light.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's and also the far left and the far right both use scapegoats. So Trump's scapegoat is the immigrant, the global economy, whereas
China.
Yeah,
I know China.
His ties are made in China, aren't they still?
Or no, they were made in Mexico.
Oh,
which I it's still like equally as funny.
Idea, yeah.
But Bernie's scapegoat is rich people. Bernie believes that the economy is rigged against the average American. He thinks that billionaires are running the country. Well, a billionaire might be running the country soon, but it's not the one the other billionaires want.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this narrative that the rich are in complete control is absolutely crazy.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if the rich really controlled the U.S. government, wouldn't the top 1% only pay 1% of the taxes? Or wouldn't they pay 0% of the taxes? Like, rich people don't pay their fair share. The top 5% contribute over 40% of tax revenue in this country. So Bernie's equally as guilty of Trump as using factually incorrect and ignorant scapegoat or ignorant tactics that involve scapegoating.
Mm-hmm. I think people see the millionaires and billionaires that don't pay their taxes and say, see, they're the ones that are stealing from all the workers, all the common people, and they might not realize that a lot of the 1% does pay their taxes.
An argument that Bernie really has on his side, though, is the Citizens United court case.
Yeah.
That, I don't know. What do you feel about that, Michael?
There's so much that can be said about it. You can argue both sides, because I know I had the article about it where I was saying on this one weekend, Bernie was in the Vatican talking about money in politics. Hillary was at a fundraiser where the premium seat was $330,000. This happened just days after the debate where Bernie released his taxes that Friday. It showed he makes $205,000 a year, not enough to buy a premium seat at Hillary's fundraiser, and Hillary never released her transcripts to the big banks. So I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, it was showing that yes, there is a problem of huge money in politics, and Hillary's backed by these large all those things people say, the large corporations, so much money. In a sense, money does show your support for someone. It is a way of voting, but it's taken to the extreme, so you can argue both sides. I don't have a strict opinion on it.
I will say this. The way it exists right now, it is illegal. Or it is legal. It's constitutional.
Mm-hmm.
So until we get a constitutional amendment, nothing is to be said about it. That doesn't mean that we don't, encourage our representatives to go do anything about it, but wanting to restrict people from doing that right now until there's a constitutional amendment for it is not legal. But there's credence to the argument that rich people have too much influence in our political system.
Mm-hmm.
Princeton did a study, and it basically concluded that the United States political system operates in some respects like an oligarchy, because rich people sort of get the policies that they want.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it funny at the same time that rich people don't have influence, they buy it. Rich people don't have power; they buy it. The government has the power to dispense these privileges. And the argument that Bernie supporters and the left wants to make that, rich people are buying the government, so let's make the government bigger. Rich people would have no reason to buy the government if the government didn't have the power to grant special privileges in the first place. So, like corporate welfare, why do we have corporate welfare in the first place? Why should we blame companies for doing what's in their best interest of lobbying the government to get special privileges the government's going to give out? So elect some stronger-willed representatives, and conservatives have been on the right side of this for a long time. True conservatives, at least, have been wanting to strip companies of corporate welfare and other corporate interests. But the fact of the matter is that there's just this. My favorite description of this is there's a book called This Town by Mark Leibovich that describes how corrupt DC is, and he calls it, a lavishly greased, gilded revolving door between, Wall Street and K Street and, Congress. So, there's a professional political class in this country like in no other, because our political system is far different than most countries. We don't have restricted. We can have ads more than 90 days before our elections. Our election season is almost 2 years long. We have the most extensive election process of any country in the Western world. But that I think Bernie has a point, but to a point.
Yeah, of course. When you were saying that, I was just thinking about something. I forgot what it was. But it's that Bernie supporters are always arguing that, of course, what we're saying this whole time, that the millionaires and billionaires have an unfair level of say. But that's contradictory to the fact that Hillary is supported by all these people and she's doing well in the campaign. But Bernie's supported by the common people and unions and small lobbying groups, and he's pretty much on par with Hillary for most of the campaign. He's in the same ballpark as her. He's been able to actually compete against her. So to say that the millionaires and billionaires have an unfair advantage when the common people supported a candidate that competed with this person, you lose your credibility to a certain extent there.
Jeb Bush raised $110 million in the span of 5 months. It was the most money any presidential campaign has raised ever.
Really?
For in that time span. Yeah. Presidential campaigns usually cost over $1 billion. But Jeb Bush raised a crap ton of money, had the support of the establishment, and he had all the endorsements, and he had all the money, and he had all the influence, and he lost. He lost spectacularly.
That was terrible.
So, millionaires and billionaires controlling the political process is pretty funny. So, if anything, it's more corrupt on the Democratic side. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been rigging the game for Hillary. In a lot of ways, like especially, it's in some ways it's subtle, and in other ways it's not. One of the ways that wasn't was when she scheduled the debate. What was it? On the eve of
the New York one.
Yeah, no, the one before that, when it was in December. Oh, what was in December?
Was that the Flint one?
No, that was.
How many debates have there been for the Democrats?
A lot.
Yeah, see, this definitely shows you, like, we have the longest campaign season. I remember a year ago, people were like, you guys know that the election is still a year and a half from now?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I can't remember what it was, but Bernie said, there must not have been any available days or any available slots on Christmas Eve because nobody was watching. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic establishment have been showing for Hillary the whole time. So you might have a point on the Democratic side, not on the Republican side. The Republican side, the insurgent that nobody wanted, won. So,
and yeah, you can say parties have a right to support a certain person. The Republican Party definitely has a right to say, hey, we don't support this candidate. We don't support Trump. He doesn't align with us. But at the same time, it is what the people have wanted. It's what the people voted for. So it's just another issue you can argue on, whether or not what the parties are doing with their candidates that they choose is right or not.
On that note, we're going to have to wrap it up. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode of the Soapbox featuring Michael Marrow. And have a good week.